how can we recover our light?
Different aspects of light.
To shine as bright and intense as 1,000 suns.
And how they metaphorically play out in our own ability.
It's not always easy.
Brightness and intensity.
There's an even greater call.
Is how we perceive light, the actual power of light.
To bust out, to play big. Hi, my name is Reverend Ryan Alexander, and we are Soul Evolution Collaborative, and this is Truth Be Told 2.0, our weekly program where we explore spiritual principles and how we can actually use them in our everyday lives. So what is Soul Evolution Collaborative, you may ask? Well, this is a spiritual community dedicated to personal transformation and communal evolution. A place to belong, a place to explore, and a place to be authentically you. So speaking of being authentically you, all month long, we are going to be exploring the topic of recovering the light. And by light, that thing that's within all of us, that thing that makes us unique, yet connects us to one another and to the very essence of all that is. And so we're going to explore how this light shows up in our experiences, our perception of our own light, the light of others, and how it shows up collectively. So we're going to use our physical understanding of light, brightness, intensity, hue and tone, reflection, refraction, and contrast to come to a deeper understanding of the power of our own light. So put on your shades and get ready for another episode of Truth Be Told 2.0.
In this series, we are talking about recovering the light by better understanding the different aspects of light and how they metaphorically play out in our own ability to shine. But before we can get to recovering the light, we have to look at how we accidentally recover the light. Like cover the light. It'll make more sense in a minute, but the short of it is, there is a part unique to each of us that is meant to shine. And very often, life teaches us to cover that part up, to play small, to not shine too brightly. Okay, so first, let's talk about the aspects of light that are going to help us better understand this week's theme: brightness and intensity. Brightness is how we perceive light, while intensity is the actual power of light. I don't know about you, but somehow this kind of seems backwards, like it's taken a little bit of time for me to kind of unlearn and relearn this. But looking at it this way, in this new way, specifically around brightness, has actually been really helpful. Frequently, we hear it talked about like, don't let anyone dim your light, don't let others affect how you shine, shine bright like a diamond, like the song, right? Better understanding brightness and intensity actually make perfect sense here. Right? Because so often we look at how our light is perceived in the world. Our brightness depends on comparison and looking at the world around us. And so it seems really obvious why many of us would end up playing small so often. When we think our shine depends on our brightness, we're measuring completely inaccurately. Brightness is all about perception. Intensity, on the other hand, is like an absolute value. It shines consistently no matter our perception. It is like the truth with a capital T. So no wonder we end up playing small when we look at the shine of our light as something that can change, especially when life teaches us to do this. Most of us are not taught to look for the intensity of our light. We are taught to look for how we compare to others, how we compare to ourselves. So we often learn to doubt our worthiness. We are taught to play small. Your light dims, and so obviously you are unworthy of whatever it is your story tells you to be unworthy of. But through the lens of brightness, worthiness is a scale and not a constant. We play small when we become concerned with not wanting to outshine others, as if our light isn't all from the same source. That somehow when our perception of light is, and its brightness shifts, that we'll end up hurting others. Maybe we'll blind them, or we'll cast shadows that throw them into darkness. We end up taking responsibility of the experience of others in ways that is not at all ours to take responsibility for. All because we're misunderstanding the nature of light, the nature of brightness and intensity. So perhaps we play small and cover our light through uncertainty, through fear and the unknown. The places we haven't been yet can seem to be pretty dark. And we are taught that dark is bad, right? There are scary things in the dark. So if you're out in the woods at night, yeah, maybe. It can be beneficial to have a natural and balanced fear of what might be in the woods at night. That's really just our brain's way of trying to keep us safe from this evolutionary history of real danger. But when it comes to the darkness of the unknown, it's almost as if that same mechanism is trying to protect us from the proverbial darkness as well. When in reality, it is just a matter of needing to shine a light in a new place that we just haven't been yet. If we approach this from the perspective of brightness, there's no way for our light to shine everywhere all at once. And so it seems natural to fear where our light doesn't shine. Yet again, we are playing small. The source of our light does not depend on our perception of it to shine. Intensity is the actual power of light. Brightness is our perception of that light. And so in our metaphor this month, light is everywhere. It is the source of all. And we are free to perceive this light however we choose. However, this does not alter the light itself. It only alters our perception of it. We were born shining brightly. Life taught us to cover the light, to only shine so brightly, to cater our light to that which is around us. And in doing this, we play small. We dim our light to fit in. And so we must relearn the nature of the light that is behind our shine. Its nature and intensity is absolute. We are setting aside the 31 days of December to honor and celebrate the light, that which animates and sustains life. Each and every evening of the month, the Soul Evolution Collaborative will be live online on Facebook and YouTube to lead the community and all those participating in a few short moments of recognition and celebration of the many ways in which the light shows up in our lives. For more information, go to soulevolutioncollaborative.org/events.
So how can we recover our light? And I guess more specifically, how can we begin to remember our light? The truth of the very essence of ourselves, in the midst of the things that scream, you should play small or stay hidden. Not to be too much. There's an even greater call to bust out, to play big, to shine as bright and intense as 1,000 suns. But how can we step into this experience? I'm going to level with you. It's not always easy. But the more we explore and the more that we're open to the possibility, the more space we create to step into our lives in powerful ways. There are a few key elements in this journey to recovering our light. So this takes courage. And the literal definition of courage is the ability to do something that frightens us. To be willing to experience the fear, the discomfort, the unknown, and to step out in ways that help us remember our own light, our own brightness. So being willing to get even into this conversation is an act of courage, to step into new places, into new spaces. It takes authenticity. And there's that word again. I know we use that a lot, but authenticity, according to Dr. Brene Brown, and I love this definition, and I think it really cuts to the heart of it in a language and tone that far surpasses Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition. Dr. Brown defines authenticity as the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Notice she says daily practice. It's not a one and done deal. A daily choice. Hell, sometimes a minute-to-minute choice to let go of those things or expectations that keep us playing small or our light dim. Another key element in this conversation is vulnerability. And now I know, even the thought of vulnerability has me packing my bags and heading for the hills. So I get if you want to press pause now and wait a few seconds and fast forward through this part. But I invite you just to stay with me just for a moment and sit in the discomfort and take a breath. Being vulnerable opens us or exposes us, and we often think that reveals the worst of what could possibly happen. But I invite us just for a moment right now to curb that negative bias of our brain and entertain the possibility that vulnerability could just be the catalyst for full expression, for building community, for creating a space and a place of belonging for ourselves and for others. The willingness for vulnerability cracks the door wide open and ushers in experiences and opportunities that we never thought possible. Experiences that often become the gateway to remembering our light, nurturing it in both ourselves and those around us. And all of the components, courage, authenticity, vulnerability, have their power in the simple practice of curiosity. Honestly, without curiosity, I'm not sure any of these things are even possible. Rooted and grounded in curiosity, we create a space that is open to possibilities, even if we can't always see what those are in front of us. Curiosity becomes the driving energy that calls us to remember our light, exploring what is possible, no longer satisfied to stay in the shadows, but yearning to bring the remembering of our own light into the full expression of our experience, playing big and shining bright.
So, brightness and intensity. This idea has kind of rocked me a little bit because I think I've always heard light in the context of New Thought. I think I've always heard light talked about as shine brightly, like shine your light brightly, and like that's a goal.
As bright as you can.
Yeah, right. Right, exactly. Like somehow to not shine brightly is like, it's like that malpractice. Like, ooh, you're doing it wrong. You gotta do the thing to shine, right? So there's that piece of it, or like maybe there's times where we're not going to shine bright, and that's got to be okay too, right? Like the wholeness of it all.
And authenticity. We talk about authenticity, so
yeah,
that plays into that as well.
But the thing that has really, really like gotten me to pause is the idea that brightness is scalable. Like brightness shifts and changes, and it's all about our perception. So the closer we get to a light, the brighter it's going to seem. The further away from a light, the dimmer it's going to seem. And so gauging my own shine on brightness, I think probably has a place. Like, I think that's probably a good, if we can do it objectively, it's probably a good scale to recognize, because authentically speaking, I'm not going to recognize my brightness at like 100% all the time. I think that's probably unrealistic. But the idea of intensity compared to brightness, intensity is like, it's almost like the absolute, like the consistent, like it's the power of a light, regardless of our perception of it. It is always at that much power. And like, so, light, I think light within the spiritual circles is, we don't necessarily recognize it as a metaphor, but I mean, I think it is. It's like, it's a metaphor, right? Like the metaphor of light, like light being the all that there is, light being the source of life. That light itself, the intensity of that light is always consistent. Like it's always, whether it's whatever percentage, like it's always 100%. Like it is always 100% wherever it is. And so this month of like uncovering, accidentally recovering, and then recovering, those words mean a lot more when they're written down, but like that all of a sudden means a whole other thing to me when looking at like, oh yeah, there is a light in me, which in, the intensity of that light is 100% all the time. And so I shouldn't gauge my brightness based on how I perceive it showing up in the world around me.
Well, and even, when you were talking about, that brightness is that thing that shifts and it's fluid and there's a spectrum of it and a scale. Um, I think also like understanding the intensity like that power that does not change. But we get caught up in this kind of brightness and in that scale when we compare ourselves to others.
Yeah.
And so I think there is that comparative piece too, of like, oh, I'm not as good as this, or I didn't show up as this, or this is what's expected, and this is how I showed up. And so it becomes this like, I don't know, it becomes this like never reaching target
Right.
of brightness when we look at it from that perspective, because in that it is this kind of always changing, and I think that is just the nature of our experience, because how we exist in this world is this kind of like compartmentalizing, comparing, seeing ourselves in relation to others. And so I don't think it's to make that wrong, because I think that's how we kind of navigate this experience. But I think the conversation is really important to understand that is not the totality of the light, that is an aspect that we can be aware of, but it's not the totality. And the totality is that intensity, which is that thing that's in all of us. It does not change. So the same thing that's in you is in me. It's that same thing that doesn't change. And I think that is the part that we are recovering, or maybe it's just that remembering that awareness of that. I do think it gives I don't know, dare I say texture to the conversation.
You dare. Go.
to look at it with that understanding, to look at it that there's a difference between our perception and what is, and that we are always going to see through the lens of our perception and our perspective. And so that's never going to change, because that's how we experience the world. But I think in these conversations, we begin to shift and move and see things from different perspectives. And so then it becomes a really rich experience, because we're not just seeing it from one angle.
Scientifically, we are each shining in some sort of way, right? Like that light, that which we see,
Right.
But also, there is like a source of being, right, that we're referring to as the light. Like, so there's like this source of being that is within each one of us. And so isn't this just a reminder to turn within, like the thing that we're looking for, that which moves us, like that which we are of? We understand that by going within, right? Like by looking inward, by recognizing the connection that exists between us and everything else. That's all found inside of us, right? And so like when we go to look for our light, we're taught, I mean, I think even within New Thought, like we're shown and taught to look for how we shine in the world.
Yeah.
And so what happens is when we're taught to look for that, we start looking for it. And so we are basing our brightness, which makes sense. We're basing our brightness based on how it's perceived in the world. And yet we're bypassing, we're stepping over the source of that illumination, the source of that light, right? So it's like, another reminder to go within for the thing I'm looking for. It's not that it doesn't show up outside of us, but what shows up outside of us is the outpicturing of belief, of thought, right? This experience is the sum total of thoughts and beliefs and patterns and habits and stories, right? Like the whole list of all of the things, the filter through which our subconscious, that outpictures. And so our brightness is our internal source light filtered through all of that stuff in any given moment, right? And so it's like, oh, right, I can't look for the light outside of me without recognizing that is the light outside of me is mirroring back to me what that light looks like filtered through my whole perception of life. But if I look inward for that light, just like if I look inward for the source of anything else, that's where we find it with a capital, light with a capital L, truth with a capital T, right? That's the big picture thing. Yes, that's only found inward.
I think a part of recovering it is recognizing those things that distract us from that. And I think, and I don't think it's like, it's not making it wrong to be distracted, because I think that's just the nature of things. But I think just being aware that our fears, our own discomforts, maybe with the unknown, our own discomforts, our insecurities about how we show up, or how we show up in comparison to others, and all those things, you name it, the things that kind of keep us playing small, like we talked about, and beginning to look at kind of what's behind those things, what's behind the fear, what's behind the uncertainty, what's behind all those things, and to begin to maybe uncover those things, so that we can recover the light, or bring it, into a balance of that which was within us and that which we perceive on the outside, to get it kind of closer together, in that way.
It's really just all about like the subconscious, the collective. Again, like we're back to that again, which right. Great. I love it. Let's talk about it all day long. But yeah, it is. It's like, oh, that makes so much sense. Like if you have a flashlight and you put a filter over the front of it, or if you have like a stage light and you put a filter over it, the light, the source of the light is still exactly the same, but the way the light shows up on stage is different. Yeah. You change that filter, the source of the light is still exactly the same. The way that light shows up on stage is different again, right? And so I think it's the same thing, that our source is oneness, and however you would really define and explain all that. But then our filter of life is just like you were saying, the domestication. It's all the learning, it's all of the teaching, it's all of the things we've misunderstood, it's all of the things we've rightly understood. I mean, it's all of the experiences that we've learned. Like, there are things about this world that we need to figure out how to maneuver, and to make our life work, and a lot of those things can be great, and that also alters how our light shows up. And so when we're gauging our brightness, I guess the idea is not to ignore brightness, right? Because I think brightness can be great, but maybe it's just that objectivity of looking at brightness as a means of gauging whether life is showing up the way we are desiring it to or not. I'm not sure I have an answer to this, but it makes me think about a lot of the old mythology about harvest and winter, and needing to bring the light indoors, or burying the light, or going underground and hibernating, and all of these periods of darkness as part of the cycle of the light coming back, our perception of light coming back. And I guess I'm just noticing that there is a tendency for such a skewed perception of light. Like our brightness has to be max all the time, or something's wrong, or I think it's trying to like push to the side an experience of life that is authentic. So I guess what's coming to mind is I wonder if some of these mythological stories around darkness and the harvest and the fall and Yule and all these things, where the light dims or gets put aside or is planted, the seeds germinate in the soil, and then there's a celebration of spring when the light comes back, right? I wonder if those are just a means of understanding, like it's not going to be 100% brightness all the time, and then that's part of it, that there are experiences in life where we're all over the spectrum of brightness, and that's okay.
I'm reading a book. Well, actually, I'm listening to it on audiobook. The Light We Give.
Oh yeah.
And the author recounts this story, and it's kind of like a myth or kind of a fable sort of story, where there was this little wick in the house, and the darkness came. The sunset and the darkness came, and the little wick and the little candle kind of sat up and said, and lit its little flame, and said that I my goal is not to dispel all darkness, because I know I can't do that. But what I can do is shine my light in my own little corner. And then what happened in the story is then there were little wicks in all the houses across all the world, and they did the same thing, that they put their wicks up, lit their wicks, and shone their light in their own little corner. And so that the goal was not to dispel darkness, but the goal was to shine in their own little corner and what was theirs to do in their own authentic ways. And so I think that that's kind of true in this. It's like the goal is not to dispel the darkness, because it is part of the wholeness, right? And so, but I think sometimes we think we've got to shine so bright so that darkness loses and light wins.
Wow.
We have that sort of especially in I think.
Oops! Do I sense a bit of underlying dualism? Whoop!
Yeah,
right? Yeah, we do.
It's easy. I mean, it's easy. I mean, that's what our brains do. That's kind of, honestly, that the darkness is part of the light, right?
But I was going to say that's an interesting distinction between a perception of life where there is not light and darkness, but just a continuum of how light shows up. So much of the Western world is based around this ideology of, this dualistic ideology of light versus darkness, and one needs to triumph and take over one is going to. We don't know which one yet, but one of them is going to triumph over the other one. And yet what I hear you saying is like there is a distinction between this dualistic perspective and the continuum where they all exist, and neither of them are good or bad. It's our perception. Again, here it's our perception. Right. When we perceive one as good and then the other has to be bad, well, then we have to go all the way and like, well, this one has to be correct and this one has to be wrong, and which means I need to be striving for this one all the time.
It allows us to be human, right?
Yeah.
To have those experiences that are, maybe ones that we wouldn't want to have, but, to allow us to like, misstep and trip and fall and, be messy and all those sorts of things. Thank you for participating and coming along this journey this month as we talk about the light. Like I said, there's going to be so many layers. This is not going to be a usual light conversation. At least I hope not. I think we're going to learn together about the light and about how it shows up in our own lives and our perceptions of it, and how those perceptions influence how we move in the world. So it's going to be a great month of conversation. We look forward to seeing y'all back here next week. If this was not enough of this conversation, you want to dive in a little bit deeper, we have our Thursday gathering where we take this topic and we come in a small group format and we just begin to share of our own experiences. Speaking of experiences, we have our second Sunday experience, which is every Sunday. We gather at 6:30 and we have a little dinner and conversation from 6:30 to 7. And then from 7 to 7:30, we have just a quick experience of the topic of the week. And then we can take that experience and what we learned into our lives. And so there's always something going on at Soul Evolution Collaborative. If you want to know more, check us out on the website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. If we don't see you Thursday, then we'll see you back here next week.